You're sitting at home when the police arrive and arrest you. They tell you there were witnesses that people saw you. Even your fingerprints were found at the scene, and security cameras captured your face, clearly. But there's just one problem. It wasn't you. That's exactly what happens in Stephen King's The Outsider. A man is accused of a brutal murder and the evidence against him seems airtight. Except that dozens of people can also prove he was in another city at exactly the same time. Someone who looked exactly like him, a double, had committed the crime. So what happens when your face, body, or self no longer belongs to you? What if a double could walk beside you unseen? What if only one of you could exist? Which one would it be? Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, Doppelgangers. One of the most famous doppelganger stories in history began at a boarding school. In 1845, a French teacher named Emilie Sagée took a position at an all-girls school in what is now Latvia, and many of its pupils came from wealthy or noble families. By most accounts, there was nothing especially unusual about Emilie herself. She was educated, respected, and considered a good teacher. But according to the story, this was already her 19th teaching post. Not because she was bad at her job. In fact, she was apparently well liked and was said to have received letters of recommendation wherever she was dismissed. The problem wasn't Emilie. It was the thing that seemed to follow her. The sightings began only a few weeks after she arrived. At first, they were easy to dismiss. One student would ask where Emilie was and another would say she had just seen her somewhere else. Then someone else would insist that they'd seen her in a completely different part of the school at the same time. Teachers dismissed the stories as childish gossip or confusion. But then the reports became harder to explain. During one lesson, Emilie was writing on the blackboard in front of 13 girls. As she moved the chalk across the board, another Emilie reportedly appeared beside her. The figure looked exactly like her and copied her movements, but there was no chalk in its hand. All 13 pupils were said to have told the same story. Other sightings followed. Sometimes, when Emilie stood up from the chair, the double appeared sitting in the seat she had just left. Servants and students reportedly saw it standing behind her at dinner, mimicking the act of eating without food or cutlery. On another occasion, Emilie was helping a pupil fasten the back of her dress before a party. When the girl looked into the mirror, she saw two Emilies behind her. The shock was apparently enough to make her faint. What makes the case stranger is that Emilie herself never saw the double. She only knew it was there because of the way the other people reacted. Witnesses also claim that whenever the double appeared, Emilie seemed to weaken. Her face would lose colour. Her movements became slow and tired. The double, meanwhile, appeared more solid and lifelike. Then, when the figure faded, Emilie seemed to return to herself. The most famous incident supposedly happened during an embroidery lesson. Around 42 students were sitting inside the classroom while another teacher supervised them. Through the window, the girls could see Emilie outside in the garden collecting flowers. Then the supervising teacher left the room. A moment later, the students saw Emilie sitting in the teacher's empty chair at the front of the class. But when they looked back out of the window, the real Emilie was still in the garden. Only now, she seemed strangely drained, as though the effort of simply standing there had become difficult. A few of the girls reportedly approached the figure, and later retellings claim they felt a soft resistance in the air around it, almost like fabric. One girl was even said to have partially passed through it. Then, the figure disappeared. Afterwards, Emilie was asked whether she had felt anything unusual. She said she had noticed the supervising teacher's chair was empty and had thought the girls would probably misbehave without someone watching them. That detail is one of the most interesting parts of the story because it makes the double feel almost like an outward version of Emilie's own thought, as though part of her had tried to go back into the room. Eventually, the school let her go, not because of her teaching, but because the stories frightened the pupils and supposedly their parents began removing them from school. According to the tale, Emilie said this was her 19th time it happened. Stories about Emilie Sagée spread across Europe, and the case became one of the most famous doppelganger accounts ever recorded. But there's one major problem with it. Almost everything we know comes from one main source: Robert Dale Owen's 19th century book, Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World. Later versions are mostly retellings of that account. There are no photographs, no official investigations, no solid school records proving every detail happened exactly as described. There is even uncertainty around Emilie herself. Some researchers have found a possible birth record from Dijon in 1813, which roughly matches where and when she was said to be born. But the name on the record is not Emilie Sagée, it is closer to Octavia Sagée or Saget. That doesn't prove the story's false, but Emilie Sagée was not the only one. And the idea of the double is much older than this one school in Latvia. Today, the word doppelganger is usually used for people who coincidentally look like celebrities, but the original version isn't just someone who looks the same. It's more like they're also a part of you. The word doppelganger comes from German. It combines doppel, meaning double, and ganger, meaning goer or walker. So a doppelganger is literally a double walker. The term itself was made famous by the German romantic writer Jean-Paul Richter, who used it in his 1796 novel Siebenkäs. And as always, I like to be honest with you. Coming into this video, I thought a doppelganger was basically a form of cryptid, a solid creature that was your exact double. But the more cases I read through, the more it seems the doppelganger is more of a spectral being, almost ghost-like. And that makes more sense as doppelgangers are said not to cast a shadow. Some say their reflections can't be seen in mirrors or water, but that contradicts what a very famous person claimed. The 16th President Abraham Lincoln reportedly saw a double image of himself in a mirror. The two reflections were separate and distinct. One reflection looked pale and less lively. Lincoln told his wife about it, Mary Todd, who interpreted the pale double as a warning that he would survive the first presidential term, but die during the second. And we all know how that went. Long before the word doppelganger existed, people across the world already believed that a human being could somehow be divided or duplicated. In ancient Egypt, people believed the person possessed something called a ka. The ka was a spiritual double connected to the self, capable of surviving after death. It was an aspect of the person that existed beside the physical body. In Norse tradition, there's the vardøger. This wasn't a double you could see, but more like a future echo of someone arriving before they did. People claim they heard footsteps, voices, or saw movement connected to a person's moments before the real individual appeared. In Celtic folklore, people spoke about the fetch. To encounter your own double was believed to be a warning that death was near, and you're going to see that idea pop up a few times. Seeing the fetch of another person could also mean tragedy was approaching them. Japan has its own version in the stories about the ikiryō. An ikiryō was said to be a living spirit capable of leaving the body and appearing elsewhere. In some tales, strong emotions such as rage, grief, or jealousy caused part of the self to separate and act independently. These spirits could haunt, threaten, or torment other people even while the original person remained alive, and even unaware. One of the oldest doppelganger stories in history appears in the middle of the Trojan War. You've probably heard or seen the version where Paris of Troy abducted Helen of Sparta. In the better known version, Paris of Troy takes Helen from Sparta, and the Greek kings launch a massive war to bring her home. But one ancient version tells a very different story. In the play Helen by Euripides, Helen never goes to Troy at all. Instead, the gods create a perfect copy of her made from cloud and air. The real Helen is trapped in Egypt, so Paris believes Cloud Helen is real. The dangerous part isn't that there's a copy, but that nobody can tell the difference. You don't usually get this problem with identical twins, unless your sibling's a bit doolally. So what was the doppelganger? And is there an explanation for them? As doppelganger stories spread across Europe, one belief appeared again and again, that seeing one was an omen. In many traditions, seeing your own double meant death was approaching. Some believed the soul had already begun separating from the body before death fully arrived. Others thought the appearance of a double marked a fracture in fate itself, as though something had gone wrong in the natural order. One of the most famous stories comes from the German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Years before becoming one of Europe's great literary figures, Goethe claimed he experienced something deeply strange while travelling along on the countryside road. As he rode, he suddenly saw another rider approaching him from the opposite direction. The figure looked exactly like him, but there was something unusual about the clothing. The man wore a grey suit trimmed with gold, clothes Goethe did not recognise and had never owned. The vision lasted only a moment before disappearing. Years later, Goethe travelled along the same road again. This time, he realised he was wearing the exact same clothes he had seen on the mysterious figure years earlier. Goethe didn't claim the experience was supernatural. In fact, he described it more like a strange mental impression than a ghostly encounter. But the story became famous because it suggested that the mind might somehow create an image of itself. Other writers became connected to similar stories. The poet Percy Shelley was said to have encountered his own double shortly before his death at sea. According to accounts repeated by those close to him, Shelley claimed the figure appeared before his fatal voyage, in one version silently pointing towards the water. By the 19th century, the doppelganger had changed. Science thought it had found the answer. For centuries, people explained doppelgangers through spirits, curses, or omens. But in the 20th century, scientists began studying people who genuinely believed they'd seen another version of themselves. Under certain conditions, the human brain can lose its normal sense of where the self begins and ends. Neurologists studying patients with epilepsy, brain injuries, and severe migraines found that some people experience what is known as autoscopic hallucination. They described seeing their own body standing nearby as though another self had entered the room. Some patients claimed the figures copied their movements. Others said it stared silently at them. A few believed the double was hostile or somehow more real than they were. This is the part I find most disturbing, the thought that the other version is the original and that you're the copy. Researchers have connected many of these experiences to brain regions involved in body awareness, especially around the temporoparietal junction. This area helps combine information from sight, touch, balance, and spatial awareness into a sensible state of being located inside of your body. Normally, the process happens so smoothly that we never notice it. But when that system becomes disrupted, the brain begins to produce strange effects. A person may feel detached from their body, they may feel a presence standing nearby, or in rare cases, the brain may construct a second version of the self entirely. Scientists have even managed to trigger similar sensations in laboratory conditions by electrically stimulating parts of the brain connected to the body perception. In one famous case, a patient suddenly became convinced there was a shadowy figure standing directly behind her and mimicking her posture. Whenever she moved, the presence seemed to move as well. Modern neuroscience does show the human sense of self is not nearly as fixed as it feels. It's something the brain continuously constructs, and under the wrong conditions, that construction can begin to break apart. Not all doppelgangers manifest purely in thought. Some appear much closer, in the mirror. Neurologists discovered that some patients with neurological disorders began insisting that the person in the mirror was someone else entirely. To them, the figure in the mirror had become an imitation pretending to be them. Scientists call this mirrored self misidentification. Under the right conditions, that feeling can weaken or even disappear altogether. Anyone can experience strange distortions involving reflections. In several psychological experiments, participants were asked to stare at their own faces in dimly lit mirrors for extended periods. After enough time, many reported disturbing changes. This is related to the Bloody Mary phenomenon. You can watch the full video about it here. Researchers later named the phenomenon the strange face illusion. I don't think that's a very original name, but that's what they called it. Scientists believe the effect is caused by a sensory adaptation and the brain struggling to maintain stable facial recognition in low light. So according to science, anyone is exposed to the risk of seeing their double. Not every doppelganger is seen with the eyes. Some are created by memory itself. One of the most famous examples happened after the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. In the hours after the attack, several witnesses reported seeing a mysterious second suspect connected to the bombing. The media quickly referred to him as John Doe No. 2. Descriptions of the man spread through interviews, newspapers, and television reports. Before long, people became convinced they had seen him. But investigators later concluded that the second suspect may never have existed at all. The image had likely formed through confusion, overlapping witness statements, and repeated discussion between different people trying to make sense of a traumatic event. In other words, an entire society may have accidentally created a phantom person. May have. The doppelganger is one of the oldest fears in human history because it attacks something deeply personal, the fear of losing certainty in yourself. And I guess to make it more culturally relevant, what risk does AI have of becoming your doppelganger? We give it our voice so it can speak like us. We tell it everything about us, sometimes things we wouldn't tell anyone else. It can create images that look exactly like us. So, what if one day it wanted to replace us? What if one day it wanted to replace you? To prove it's really you, leave a like, leave a comment, and watch this next video.